Well, thanks very much. I'm delighted to address today's conference. And as you said, it's organised by the Just Transition Partnership, and that's the co-chaired by the STUC alongside yourselves at Friends of the Earth Scotland. And I'd like to begin, if I may, by paying tribute to the work of that partnership and many other comrades across the trade union movement and the environmental movement in Scotland, because I do think that in recent years we've seen a real growth of joint work, and that's boosted climate activism within the trade union movement, and it's also boosted a trade union approach within the environmental movement, and I think that's very welcome. We've seen workers in BIFAB, for example, occupy renewables yards in defence of green jobs. We've seen youth climate strikers stand with trade unionists on picket lines, while trade unionists were marching alongside climate justice activists during COP26. And we've seen workers at places like Rolls-Royce and in Shannon develop their own worker-led plans to decarbonise their workplace. And we've seen joint trade union, community and environmental campaigns across Scotland's key cities on public transport and retrofitting of homes. And, you know, a lot of these have been taken forward by our trades councils. And these are campaigns that really connect the climate crisis to ordinary people's everyday material concerns within their communities. And I don't think that joint work has ever been more important or more urgent than it is right now, because the challenge before us is to transform our energy system in a way which addresses the climate crisis, but also the cost of living crisis and the green jobs crisis all together at the same time. And that's not going to be easy. And we know that these issues are inextricably linked. If we look at the climate crisis, we're currently on track for 3 to 4 degrees of warming by 2050. That's going to bring huge consequences for future generations if we don't get this right. But right now, what we know is that it's predominantly an issue for the working class in the global south, who are at the sharp end of extreme weather events caused by our current economic model and the consumption habits of the rich. And here in Scotland, if we look at the cost of living crisis, ordinary people are experiencing the biggest fall in living standards since records began. Families are struggling to feed their kids and to heat their homes. And Scotland's an energy-rich nation, but we've got some of the most substandard housing in Europe, and a third of our people are currently living in fuel poverty, and that is rising rapidly. And that is just an absolute disgrace. And it's a situation that sadly is only going to get worse this coming April, when bills are due to be hiked up again. So let me spell it out. Ordinary people should not be paying a penny more for their energy. We need to urgently lower energy bills. We need to end late payment fees, and we need to scrap the scandal that is prepayment meters. And at the very same time as the working class here in Scotland endure rising energy prices and the working class overseas bear the brunt of global warming, we're facing an absolute dearth of green jobs, despite the growth in renewable companies that are extracting the wealth from our natural resources. Back in 2010, we had Alex Salmond talking about Scotland becoming the Saudi Arabia of renewables. And he predicted that 130,000 low carbon and renewable jobs would be in place by 2020. And currently the reality is that we're at less than a sixth of that. And what's worse is these figures have fallen since 2014, despite the trebling of installed renewable capacity. Now, let me be clear, the trade union movement do want more green jobs, but we also need to deal with the reality that these green jobs are not being created right now, because our renewable energy industry is dominated by multinational companies that are more than happy to offshore jobs to overseas. So we need to deal with the reality that beneath the climate, the cost of living, and the green jobs crisis that we're seeing lies the relentless profiteering of the global energy companies. And that's profiteering by companies like Shell, who just last week announced profits of $40 billion. Companies like BP, who just days after announced profits of £23 billion. A company whose own chief executive officer said that they had more cash than they knew what to do with. And we've got companies like Scottish Power and Scottish and Southern Energy, who make profit margins of more than 40% simply from the fact that they own Scotland's energy grid, while they hike up energy bills for ordinary people. It is absolutely obscene. And what do these companies have in common besides their obscene profits? Well, funnily enough, they've all won a lease to develop offshore wind on Scotland's seabed. And that typifies the problem. In the same way that we saw privatisation of British gas in the 1980s and our electricity in the 1990s, what we're now seeing is the outsourcing of Scotland's renewables resources. And we all know where this story ends. It ends in a race to the bottom for our workers, for our communities, and ultimately for our whole planet. And is it really any surprise that rather than build a thriving local supply chain, these companies offshore renewables manufacturing work to China, Indonesia, and Dubai before shipping the content halfway around the world on diesel burning barges? Well, of course not, because that's their job, to maximise profits for their shareholders. That's what they're there to do. So I want to say this to the Scottish Government. You can't claim to be a world leader on just transition while outsourcing our natural resources and offshoring jobs to countries where human rights abuses are endemic. And to the UK Government, you can't claim to be a world leader on climate if you subsidise the multinationals without any consideration of the carbon emissions caused by shipping content from halfway around the world. Now, I know others today are going to speak a lot more about the detail of specific policy proposals, but let me just state the STUC's position, that the solutions to the cost of living crisis, the climate crisis, and the jobs crisis are all underpinned by direct intervention and democratic public ownership from our UK, our Scottish, and our local governments. Only through grabbing hold of the reins of our energy systems are we going to be able to resolve these crises, to protect people's bills through affordable energy, to kickstart a major street-by-street green retrofit programme, to end profiteering from the energy monopolies, and to ensure real investment in infrastructure that brings fair works and benefits to ordinary people in our communities right across Scotland and beyond. And most importantly, we as trade unionists and as environmentalists need to get out there. We need to educate, agitate and organise together, because our fight isn't just a choice between low carbon and high carbon jobs. It's a choice between workers and bosses, between communities and boardrooms, and between inhumane profiteering and a more people-centred public service approach. In recent months, workers across Scotland have shown that when we get organised and we stand up together, we can win on pay, on terms and conditions, and on investment in our public services. And as part of that wider struggle, the people of Scotland are waking up and we're realising that we also need to work together to win back our energy systems for the benefit of our own communities and for the benefit of working class people right across our world. Thank you.